a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. And to make a request specific to this meeting, please contact cpsc@london.ca. Colleagues, I will just look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest before we move into the agenda items. Seeing none, we have one item on the consent agenda. That's 2.1, the continuation of Federal Community Action Program for Children, funding in London for 2020 to 2024. Look to see if we have a mover to receive that. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, then we will ask staff to get, actually, can I just vote verbally, or do you need to bring it up for me to vote? So we'll get staff to bring up that motion for a vote, and then we'll go around and do the roll call on that. Okay, Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee. I don't think we have Councillor Salee with us at the moment. Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Salee, we're just in the middle of a vote on the consent item here. I see you're back with us. Were you listening to the conversation to vote? Sorry, Councillor Salee, we're having difficulty hearing you.
Are you asking me to vote? It's a yay.
That's yay on, that's 2.1 that we're voting on.
Correct, yay.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Holder.
I'm sorry, I've literally just come in. I apologize. Are we approving?
We're dealing with the consent item 2.1, the continuation on the Community Action Program for Children.
Thank you, yes.
Okay, Mayor Holder's yes, and I vote yes as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, that is all the items on the consent agenda. We'll move to, we have no scheduled items, so we move next to items for direction. We have 3 of those, so we'll start with 4.1, a communication from S. Eden on food security pilot backyard chickens. And I guess we'll be looking, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can see the residents' concern here, although I don't have much information on the impacts to the food supply yet. So I know we've just seen maybe our first big bankruptcy, Hertz Rent-A-Car in the U.S. But as far as the food supply, I don't know what the impacts are. I was wondering, well, I would suggest we refer this to a meeting in the future where the conversation might be more relevant. The landscape is changing under our feet, but I don't know about this particular item. So I would move that we refer this to a later meeting, perhaps I think we've got an August 14th or 15th meeting.
Okay, Mayor Holder, you indicated you wish to speak to this.
Yes, I do. Before that goes much farther, this has been dealt with in the past by a prior council, and I think the community spoke very clearly. There are going to be some people that will be extremely interested in this, fine. But frankly, when we had input in the past from the health unit and others about some of the challenges associated with this, frankly, I don't want to spend any more time on it than the fact it's on the agenda and be dealt with it. So I won't support to refer. I would support receiving the note, filing it, and take no action. In fact, I would make that as an actual motion if that's appropriate, Chair.
Okay, so just to be clear, we had Councillor Van Holst moving a referral. The mayor has indicated he will not support that. So before we go any further on the discussion with the receive and file, as the mayor has indicated he wishes to see, do we have a seconder for the referral? Okay, seeing none. Councillor Hillier, were you indicating that you wanted to second the receipt of, okay. Now I have Councillor Squire, who was already on the speakers list. Councillor Squire, did you want to speak to the simply receiving the communication?
Yes, I was going to say what the mayor said, and I quite agree. It's been dealt with. We can't re-litigate every item from council to council, so I'm supportive of receiving and filing.
Okay, we'll look for any other discussion on the motion to receive. And I'm seeing none, so we will call to question in just a minute. Okay, and that motion is now up, so we will call to question. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Salee, I missed you. Councillor Salee.
Yes. Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I am also a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, and we'll move on to the next item on the items for direction. And this is a communication that I have put on the agenda with regard to the Holy Roller Tank Memorial. So Councillor Squire, I did give you a heads up that we were going to do this.
Yep.
Did you want to sort of take the virtual chair here? Or I don't know if you wanted to jog down to City Hall and take my seat here. I'll leave that to your discretion.
And I'm getting to an age where the heat affects me a little bit more on my running, so I think I'll just stay here. So
I'm here.
I'll take the chair. So if I don't know if there's any issue on this, maybe we can see if we can get a mover and seconder first. Councillor Hillier or Councillor Lewis, if you just want to introduce it briefly and move it.
Certainly. So, colleagues, this is with regard to the preservation and restoration of the Holy Roller Tank Memorial in Victoria Park. You also have a communication in your agenda from Lieutenant Colonel Finney from the 1st Hussars. As I'm sure you're all aware, the Holy Roller Tank has a special place in Canadian history, and sadly, very soon, it will be the last veteran of D-Day left with us in London. So, it is in poor shape. It has been suffering the effects of being out in the weather for many, many years, and the 1st Hussars have asked the city, as the owner, for permission to remove the tank and have it restored and then replaced on its pad in time to mark the 150th anniversary of the 1st Hussars in the summer of 2022. So that's why this is on the agenda now. It is actually time sensitive for them to get to start to get to work on this. They are planning to fundraise private donations that they will use to help finance the restoration here. So there's no ask for financial contribution from the city at this point. My motion does ask staff to report back with other partnership measures that we might undertake around the restoration effort. That could include things like, you know, beautification of the garden space immediately around the tank with appropriate plantings, things of that nature. But it's really to recognize the real historical significance of this asset. So I'm happy to move this and hopefully we'll have everyone's support.
Someone prepared to second that? I see the mayor raising his hand.
Yep.
Mayor is seconding. Is
And
there any
would like to
discussion?
speak? Yes, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. If I could speak to it as well. I'm extremely supportive of proceeding with this. My only concern, if I might, through you, Mr. Chair, is the issue in the letter that may suggest that there be some other actions taken in terms of through an appropriate reserve fund mechanism. I think that the First Azars have the absolute capability to raise monies and would have their own funding mechanism for that. So in the letter that the councillor sent to us, I think their cavalry fund, as he has pointed out, allows and can receive donations, but I'm not sure that I think a reserve fund organized by the city and anything else at this point that takes away from, I mean, these folks are, if I might be blunt, I think they're exhausted dealing with the COVID crisis and all that the pandemic involves. I'm just very nervous about giving them another task at this point. So, you know, if they want to give some consideration to gardens and the like, fine. Perhaps Mr. Stafford, Parks and Rec, can look at all that. But I just want us to be exceptionally careful about adding extra work to staff at this point, particularly when the First Azars are saying, look, let us take the tank out of the current place. Let us fix it up. Let us raise the money. They want to do all that. And as we get closer to it, if there is some opportunity, that's why I'm delighted to second this. I think it's great. But I just caution staff involvement of any sort of this in the short term. That'd be my comments, Chair.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. Stafford had his hand up to share something with us from a staff perspective there.
Okay, I was just going to ask, and yeah, I saw that. I just wonder if we could change the wording of the motion slightly, and it just says civic administration to be authorized to investigate all necessary steps to allow private donations. We shorten it to that. Maybe we'll stay away from the funding mechanism, but that's just a suggestion. I'll turn the mic over to Mr. Stafford in case he has anything he can assist with.
Yeah, no, I think it was covered by Mayor Holder and Councillor Squire. I think those are the two suggestions, I guess, from my behalf as well, and certainly investigate. And I think working on not a reserve fund, but as the mayor indicated, they have the ability to hold the donations themselves. So I think that's been covered. So that's terrific. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with amending it to do that.
Can you wait till I speak? Because I am sort of chairing this section. Yeah, well, so I think it can staff work on shortening that to some extent, just shorten the wording to say that they'll investigate all necessary steps to work with the First Azars to allow private donations to be received and take out the reserve fund element. So you could take out, it says, and transfer to the City of London through the appropriate reserve fund mechanism. And it could, if it's necessary, it could be looked at, but if not, then we don't need that. Is that all right, Mayor Holder?
I think that works for me. In fact, I would have, Chair, and I want to respect you and thank you for calling on me and waiting for me to speak until I was called on. So all to say that any financial references, I'd be happy with that out of there because they've got that. But I might have even suggested to the mover that as appropriate, that the city will look to assist in the beautification of the area and keep the money piece right out. And that would be my. But you know, I'm not gonna get too hard on this one. I just don't want us being involved in stuff that's their business.
All right, let's see what wording we come up with. Mover of the motion, are you content with that kind of change?
Yes, Councillor Squire, that's absolutely fine with me.
Let's see the wording, or maybe, I don't know if they have to email it to us or how this works. Or even if you read it back.
If you give us just a minute here, we'll have the clerk read it back once we've made an adjustment.
I thought that was something the chair of this section would say, actually.
Well, this is a mischievous goose. I just want to know Mr. Stafford does not have a collar on his shirt.
And we are in public session, so that's important to note, you know?
I'm quite concerned.
This was in respect to the chair of the CAPS committee.
Ah,
For the record, I chose my background based on the weather.
well, the weatherman is here. He's got the map behind him, so we're ready.
Would the chair like me to read the motion now?
That would be great.
Okay, so the motion is that the following actions be taken with respect to the communication dated May 8th, 2020 from Lieutenant Colonel A. Finney, 1st Hussars, and the communication from Councillor Lewis appended to the agenda with respect to the restoration of the Holy Roller Tank Memorial in Victoria Park. Part A, the concurrence of Municipal Council be communicated to the commanding officer of the 1st Hussars to permit a major preservation of the Holy Roller Memorial. Part B, the Civic Administration be authorized to investigate all necessary steps to work with the 1st Hussars Cavalry Fund to allow private donations to be received for the cost of this project. Part C, the Civic Administration be requested to report back at a future meeting of the Community and Protective Services Committee with a recommendation for other partnership measures that could be undertaken by the City of London itself toward this restoration effort in recognition of the historical significance of this municipally owned asset. And Part D, the above noted communications with respect to this matter be received.
All right. Do you have any issues to raise with that? No, then we'll start the vote. I'm not sure the order. I think it's Councillor Van Holst. You'll have to unmute Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salih, I didn't forget.
Yes.
And Councillor Lewis, who I did forget. If I was doing it in order.
Yes.
And Mayor Holder,
Yes.
Councillor Hillier,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Do you want me to just carry on, Mr. Chair?
If you would, please.
Thank you. The next matter is 4.3, which is the Middlesex London Health Unit Asset Disposal. And again, that's a matter brought forward by Councillor Lewis. And Councillor, I noticed you had two questions that were the initial part before the motion. I wonder, is it your pleasure, or would it be all right to see if we can get those questions answered and then move to what your motion would be? And I also want to respect the chair of the health unit who may be able to help us with those questions. So is that all right in terms of process for you?
Yes, that's actually exactly what I had in mind, so that's perfect.
Excellent. So why don't we go to our staff first and see if they have anything they can assist with those two questions. I don't know who would field this.
Mr. Chair, it's Ms. Livingston.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I can perhaps assist with the first question and look to Ms. Barbone on the second, perhaps. To the best of my knowledge, and I've consulted with other members of civic administration, we were not provided with a list of assets. So the answer to that question, to the best of my knowledge, is no.
Thank you. And Ms. Barbone.
Hello, thank you through the chair. So to my knowledge, I don't know if there is a policy in place, specifically the agreements between the Middlesex Health Unit and the City of London does not speak to policy. It's specifically a funding relationship that they identify once the board has approved what the funding requirements are in place, and then the city has an obligation to pay for their share. So any policies that would govern the mechanisms once the money transfers over would be under the purview of the health unit and would have no indication from the city any specific requirements.
Thank you. So with that being done, I'll turn it over to the chair of the health unit, who can maybe also help us with the questions at this time. So Ms. Cassidy, Councillor Cassidy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. And actually, when we meet at the board, we do use Ms. and Mr. We don't use titles, so it's appropriate, I guess. So there is a policy that the health unit has, and it comes under all of the finance policies, and the particular policy in question is G230, and it's a procurement protocol that involves capital asset purchase, replacement, and disposal. And what the policy states is that if capital assets are deemed surplus, then if they're deemed surplus to the division within the organization that uses those assets, then they are first offered to the other divisions within the health unit. If they are not needed in those other divisions, then they are offered for sale. If there is no market for those assets, then they are then offered for donation. So with these particular items in question, the furniture themselves, the furniture itself that was shown in the media interview, most of those items were over 30 years old, and they were about 10 years old at least when they were purchased, used by the health unit in the first place. So the cost to dismantle those items and dispose of them would have been in the area of about $80,000, which would have been an added cost to the health unit. We were invited by the purchaser, the new purchaser of the land, so not the landlord, but the purchaser, that he would take care of dismantling those items, which therefore saved the health unit and by extension the taxpayer $80,000 just in not dismantling that surplus furniture. So all of the protocols and policies that are in place at the health unit were followed. The problem was the items that were meant for disposal, which it showed some old electronic equipment, which was beyond its useful life, with operating systems that were no longer supported by Microsoft. So therefore, a security risk for even a home user. If a regular person were to purchase these laptops and use, for example, for their home banking, they are a security risk because there's the security features are no longer being supported or updated by Microsoft. So we would never have recommended that anybody use it for any kind of purpose that required security. So those were meant to be disposed of appropriately. Unfortunately, in the midst of the pandemic, which is where we were in the final week of the move, 80% of health unit staff are now donated to COVID response. And so the very the process that was in place for the final part of the move, where each division would have been responsible for the items that were from their department, they would have been responsible for packing up and moving those items. Unfortunately, the plan went awry as 80% were devoted to COVID relief. And so there was really a mad scramble at the end of the day to get moved, because once our lease date was up, if we were to extend our time in that location, we would have been paying double what our regular lease rate would have been. That would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to the taxpayers. So it was a combination of definitely following our policy right to the T, but when the final move was going on, there was a bit of a chaotic situation because of the pandemic.
Thank you very much. I just wondered on the first point, are you saying that the policy does not require that an offer be made to the City of London for the items? I took the policy to say that they can be sold, but there's nothing specific about the city. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. There's nothing specific about outside organizations.
Thank you very much. All right. So with that background, I'll turn it back to Councillor Lewis and see what you would like to do. The one thing I would caution, and it's a caution, is that I don't think we need to go back, or the purpose is to go back and review what happened. I think the chair of the health unit has said, used the word, things went awry during the process, which is appreciated. So we don't have to revisit it. Maybe we can focus on where we're going. So Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate you adding that, and I appreciate the board chair's comments too, because this is not, what's done is done. And I'm not interested in revisiting what could have been done different or better or potentially worse too, considering the circumstances, because I think that we have to recognize that staff at the health unit were preoccupied with a higher priority issue at the time. But for me, it's about moving ahead for future proofing and not, well, the health unit is before us today. I think there's a good question to be raised from this experience for all of our agencies, boards, and commissions where we're a significant funding partner. And that is to see that when we're disposing of items, whether they're being sold, whether they're being donated, that as a funding partner, the city's included specifically in that opportunity, whether it's to buy them or whether it's to receive them as a donation and allocate them out elsewhere. While I certainly recognize the concerns about operating systems that are past their prime and their support from Microsoft, I know that for folks who maybe don't have an access to a good device at home, there's freeware and low-cost alternative third-party software that can be installed to provide some security too. So I just want to see that we can extend the life of these things, and whether it's with the health unit or the library or the museum or anybody down the road, I think this is the place to start. So I do want to move that that we request that the Middlesex London Health Unit be requested to consult with its funding partners, and that would be both ourselves and the county, to adopt a policy that would set out a process regarding the disposal of assets in the future.
I suppose my only question would be that there is a policy in place. I think if it's something you want them to review it, because there is a policy in place. You just want to.
Yes, I'd like them to review it and consider making sure that the funding partners, the city and the county, are specifically referred to.
Okay, so that's what you're looking for.
Yes.
Is there a seconder for that? Mayor Holder, go ahead. You have to unmute. Mayor Holder, you have to, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Can I comment before we take this down a road? I am not sure that we can compel any other organization not related to us to do or not do something. I think that if the councillor is really looking, and I believe he is, looking for organizations that receive financial support from the city, whatever way we define that, without naming the health unit, because as soon as we get specific to the health unit, I think it belies the argument he was trying to make, which I think was interesting, that if we put some financial contributions into it, we would like to be informed. But I think that becomes part of the agreement that we would set out with each organization where we establish monies or put monies into. So I'm not sure he can get where he wants to get by virtue of this direction. Rather, again, I think my concern is that it's health unit specific when I think he's intending it to be, and perhaps rightly, broader. And I guess I go back to the learned counsel who happens to be chair right now and ask the question whether we can compel another organization that is arm's length to change their policies, but rather on either a per agreement basis or something, that if there are assets to be considered, that we can perhaps help to repurpose, whatever it might be. So I hope, Chair, you understand my challenge with this, and I'm going to throw it back for thoughts.
And to be fair to Councillor Hillier, Councillor Lewis, I think that's why he's saying request that they consult with their local funding partners. And to be perfectly blunt, I think they could say, we're not interested in consulting. We have a policy. Have a nice day. And so I think that's what you're saying is correct. But I think Councillor Lewis, I don't want to speak for him, I think he recognizes that in what he's doing. So maybe what we can do is see if we have a seconder unless Councillor Lewis has, based on your comments, wants to do something different. I don't know if he does. Why don't we get a seconder for the motion? If there's a seconder. All right, doesn't appear there's a seconder for the motion. So I'm going to turn this back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So we will move on to the next item in the agenda, and that is, oh, okay, sorry, just getting some advice from our learned clerk here. We need to first dispose of 4.3, so we would need to note and file. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hillier, and we will call to question on that in just a moment. Okay, the motion is up. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I also vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, moving on to the final item on the agenda. That's the deferred matters and additional business. We have the deferred matters list. Can I get a mover for that, please? Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Squire. Any comment? Seeing none, then we will call the question. And the motion is up for that. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes.
Councillor Salee.
Yes.
Councillor Squire.
Yes.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes.
And Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I am also a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That concludes our agenda, so we'll just look for a motion to adjourn, and we can just do this by hand vote. Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Squire, who's waving emphatically with both hands. And we'll just call a hand vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous, unless, oh yeah, Councillor Salee has his hand up on the sideboard too.
Have a nice evening, everyone.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.